Welcome to season 4, Fostering Change, the #1 podcast in adoption and foster care. Each week we speak to the most amazing good humans about topics that touch each and every one of us. If you have a guest suggestion or interested in sponsoring our podcast, please visit us at fosteringchange@comfortcases.org. Now, sit back, enjoy, learn, get motivated, and let's speak to some fascinating guests. It is so hard to believe that we are actually already in the month of May. May is a very special month, as you know. I actually think that we should give children who are in foster care, they should have every month. But you know what? If they're going to give us something, I'm glad they give us beautiful May. And, we're day 2 of, National Foster Care Awareness Month. When I was a kid growing up, they never even really talked about that. And it wasn't until I would say in the last 10 years have I seen a lot of light shine on this particular month. But, the one thing that I do know is that I love having this podcast because then I get to meet some amazing people. I get to become such amazing friends with people who truly have that passion that I always talk about. It's that passion where we can go and we can blame the system, and so many of us have that opportunity, or we can do what my next guest is doing, and that is she's helping us change the system. We have to understand that children arrive in the system because of a choice that someone else made. We also have to understand that children who arrive in foster care, they arrive with post-traumatic stress disorder twice the rate. Now just listen to that. Twice the rate of our combat veterans who are coming back from the front line. That's some trauma. But with my next guest, she is actually not only doing something about it, but she's also telling her story. And each and every one of us, when we tell our story, we never know how it will impact somebody. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my friend, Angela Featherstone. Angela, you are actually the founder of a fosteringcare.org, which is actually a nonprofit for healing school for children who are actually been in our foster care system.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. That statistic was just mind-blowing.
Yeah. And it's so sad, Angela, because, you and I both, being so deep within that system, people don't see that. They don't realize that right now, today, as we sit here and have this conversation, that we have close to 80% of our death row inmates were in foster care. Could you imagine if we were able to get to that little boy or that little girl prior to the things that she had to do or he had to do that got him into that place? Trauma.
I know. And I wasn't even aware of those statistics. I can't wait to talk to you more and get a hold of some of those incredible statistics that you have. The ones that have jumped out at me were that 80% of all trafficking survivors are from foster care. 80 to 90% of all youth who age out of foster care end up in prison, commit suicide, and or homeless, somewhere in there. And 30 to 40% of that is within the first 3 years. And so
yes, it's shocking. And I want to jump right into your story because, by the way, you're an amazing actress. You're an amazing actress. You had an opportunity that you could have not told your story, by the way. You had an opportunity that you could have gone on, but instead there was something that made you go and start to tell your story. And by the way, you are the first person I've ever met who actually emancipated yourself at the age of 17. Tell me about how you ended up in the system, but how you made that choice. Because let me tell you something, that's a scary choice. I was a homeless kid. That is scary to say at 17, you were all of a sudden an adult without probably having the adult tools that were supposed to be given to us as children. But how did it all start?
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I was just gonna say, while my time in foster care itself and the system was limited, it was a year and a half. In that year and a half window, I got to experience the foster care to justice system pipeline and the foster care to trafficking pipeline. So while my time was limited, it didn't take much. And so when I think about other kids, I can extrapolate that. In a year and a half, I was in and out of group homes to jail, and I got trafficked. So I can only imagine what that's like over time and exponentially. So I'm not even remotely surprised by the foster care to prison pipeline. I'm not surprised about that death row statistic, although it's heartbreaking and staggering. It's not shocking in the least. It's just another example of how unknown the devastation of the foster care system is on children and how devastating it is.
Yes. Yes.
So my story is quite simply, I suppose, that, as I see it now, I grew up with a fair amount of a physical abuse and criminal neglect and lots of abandonment and stuff. And there was a few times as a child where Child Family Services came knocking, and I got called into the principal's office with questions about the bruises on my body and stuff. But we moved a lot, and I think that contributed to us not getting removed. I will say that not long after I left home, when I was 16, I ran away from home, and then it was from there that I got put into the justice system, and it was from there that I got put into foster care. And then I was there for a little while, and then and I'll get into that, but I just want to say that after I was put into care, it wasn't long before my younger siblings were also put into care. So I was sort of I was going to say the pioneer of that. I think that I was the person that was preventing all of us being taken into care, because I was able to, I was 7 and 9 years older than the youngest kids, because I was from a different marriage. And so I was able to sort of stop the gap a little bit. I could feed them or, do something.
Very much like my sister, by the way, same situation, I feel, and just like you, people knocked on our door. People asked about the questions. And as soon as that happened, we were living in a new town.
Hello.
We were living in a new shelter. We were living in a new apartment. We were living in a new state. And it was that constant, they couldn't catch us because they knew that once that door, and we also, my fear for me, and I don't know if this was for you, Angela, but for my fear for me was that if I told them what was happening behind the doors, I was worried it would get worse. That they weren't going to believe that kid, and they were going to go tell that to my birth parents, and they were going to beat me worse or do things to me.
Well, that actually happened to me. And I think I was maybe 8 I went to live with that side of the family when I was 7. And so it was like around 8 to 9, and I got called into the office because they were concerned about the scratches and bruising and black eyes and whatnot. And so I told them, but I minimized it. I said, they asked if I was being beaten or something, and I said, well, absolutely not. I was being disciplined. And they said, so tell us about that discipline. And I said, well, they said, like, how often does it happen? And I lied, and I said, once a week, because I didn't want them to know, I wanted to minimize it. I didn't want them to know that it was whenever she felt like it.
Right.
Whenever the wind changed direction, and it didn't go in like calendar days. It went in ebbs and flows and whatnot. God bless us all. God bless us all. But yeah, and so what happened was I minimized it and sort of made it seem normal, like it was discipline. It wasn't, random, wild, feral beatings that it was. And I also minimized it time-wise, made it sound like it was only once a week and not, every day. And when I go home, I'll never forget, because I was walking, this is going to get a bit dramatic, but it's indelible. It was an indelible moment. I was walking down the hallway, and I remember where our apartment was only because I have this one memory, walking down the hallway towards the end of the hall where the apartment door was, and the door opened and my mom was standing like with her hand against the door. And she said, "So you get beaten once a week, do you? I'll show you." Like that. And then it went on. Then it was on. It was like, so I didn't have that. My guilt and shame around my body and all the bruising and the welts and that were up and down my body often, and the clumps of hair that were missing and stuff, that was very whatever the word is. Like, I kept it inside. Like, I was unawares, I think, of what other people did. And I also, to be fair, I went at this time, at this particular moment, when I was starting like to be in like junior high and have gym locker rooms to share and stuff. And so body shame would be coming up because I was an athlete, and there was a lot of times that I had to change privately, and that I had to wear clothes that maybe that the other kids weren't wearing, just to hide the welt marks and the lashing stuff, like all whatever particular signs there were of the abuse. Sometimes it was trees, and sometimes it was wooden spoons, and sometimes it was belts. It just depended what was near, or even sometimes not what was near. Sometimes I would watch her go out and pick the perfect branch off of the tree to whip, which, by the way, I didn't think anything of until I watched that show Oz, and I realized, oh, there's like some cold-blooded shit. Language.
Yes.
No, it's
like we used to have to go pick our own branch.
Oh my God. That's sadistic.
Yeah. We would have to go pick our own branch, and then there was a paddle that we would have to sign it and date it. And it was, so you and I mean, we walked that same path, but here you are, grown up. Let me tell you something, I love my therapist every single Monday when I'm on the phone with him or I'm Zooming with him, and, he's got me through a lot. What got you through this?
Well, I think one thing, as I was about to say, I don't think I had much to compare it to, because we were pretty segregated, little family, like a unit, moving and not talking to people. And no one really came in and no one really got out. But I also was, shared a bus every day, and our little town was surrounded by a First Nations reservation. So those were the kids that were and I feel like their trauma, my trauma wasn't any different than I was surrounded by like people. Well, the abuse probably was different. Like, I didn't see any bruising and stuff on my friends at school. I feel like the level of systemic trauma that they were experiencing through for whatever means it was, through their segregation, or just the life, the alcoholism, and the just whatever. I don't want to get into that, but just I wasn't a white kid in Beverly Hills. I was covered in bruises. I was a white kid with a bunch of other kids who were also having very difficult and sometimes tragic experiences. So I think in some ways that helped. And I was pretty much segregated from anyone who might be having a normal existence, quote unquote.
Yeah, I just always think, what was normal. Listen up, everybody. We got to take a quick break, but I am just beyond so excited to have my friend on. Not only the fact that she's an actress, she's a filmmaker, she's an advocate, but I love, Angela, that you are starting this nonprofit for trauma, because I do truly believe that is something that we are not talking about enough. I believe that we are not giving support enough to children who are coming out of the system. And I believe that if we start tackling this when the child is in the system, we are going to make better humans. And that is the key for our success. We'll be right back. This episode of Fostering Change is sponsored by Comfort Cases, a national nonprofit that inspires our communities to bring hope and dignity to our youth that are in foster care. For just $10 a month, you can support the Comfort Cases mission and help us eliminate trash bags for kids who are entering foster care. For every $10 that you give, Comfort Cases will give a Comfort XL to a child entering the system. Be part of the change. Visit comfortcases.org.
Well, once again, I say this quite often, there is nothing better than a good conversation, and especially when you're having a conversation that truly opens up a part of your mind to make you really start to think and say, how can I do more? How can I make sure that tomorrow is even brighter than today was? And that's exactly what I'm doing with my friend Angela. Angela, when we took our break, I had asked a question, and I really want our listeners and our viewers to hear, because I want to know how you healed your trauma, and I think that is important for people to know.
Thank you. Yeah, it wasn't something that I planned on ever. I wasn't, as we've discussed before, I wasn't even really aware that I had trauma. I mean, I knew that I had a very difficult childhood and that weird stuff had happened, and that, it was so bad at home that it was better for me to run away and live on the streets of Winnipeg, minus 30-degree weather, than it was for me to stay home. And I knew that I had a good time in juvie jail because it was the first time I really felt safe. But then foster care, the group homes were really bad for me. I didn't like them. They were really wild and feral, and I felt they were another level of criminal neglect that I wasn't aware of, because even though it was just wild, it was really outside my comfort zone in terms of, you had like 10, 11, 12 kids that are ages 10 to 18 who have been living on the streets even longer than I have, or with just varying degrees of trauma. And then there was, the street stuff and the trafficking stuff. And so I just sort of shoved it down. I held it inside. What happened for me in terms of like emancipating myself is that I didn't like the group homes. And so I don't want to go into all the details and bore everybody, but basically, one of the reasons there's the foster care to justice system pipeline, where you already get a record and you become so already understanding and in some ways even welcoming the prison system, is because you get 3 hot meals, 3 hots and a cot. You really do. And compared to the street hustle, or compared to the craziness of the group homes, that can actually you actually are safe there. You have like tons of guards protecting you. But so I was constantly running away from the group home because it was too wild for me. And then I would get a bench warrant that's how they keep track of you. Then you get a bench warrant. And then all of a sudden, if you don't make your bench warrant, if you don't make your court date, which of course you don't, because you're not, it's like 8:00 in the morning, the next morning, you're still out on your hustle, hungover, or whatever you're doing. You're certainly not checking in with your social worker. You have court first thing, you miss your court date, and now you're AWOL. Now you have a warrant out for your arrest. And so then you get picked. And so I was doing this hustle over and over and over again to basically get put back in juvie jail. And so what I finally realized, I'm not made for this. So I went and got 3 jobs. One was a nanny so I had a place to live at night where I was safe. It was a nice single mom with 2 young kids. And I grew up like babysitting. I loved kids. So that was great. And then I got a job washing dishes at a Moskowitz, like a Jewish deli, and in Winnipeg. And I got a job at a clothing store downtown that ended up being sort of involving some people who were traffickers out of Montreal, where the trafficking mobs were. But anyway, so I kind of went back to the judge and said, look, I'm a hardworking girl, please emancipate me, mostly because I needed to get out of Winnipeg, because by now I had a new charge unbeknownst to me, of what was called immorality, which I guess was prostitution, which was totally shocking to me. But now I had people after me who thought that I had, that basically wanted to kill me.
Right.
So I
Wow.
had to get out of Dodge. So I borrowed money to get as much as I could, which was only one-way bus ticket to Toronto. But by this time, oddly, and this is where it starts to probably, I don't know how many people are going to resonate with this, but I do believe that inside of all of us, there is that still quiet voice. And for me, that still quiet voice really loved books, and it loved a particular biography. This one was about Marlon Brando. He had a rough childhood. I had a rough childhood. He was from a steel town. I was from a steel town. His birthday was April 3rd. My birthday was April 3rd. And I just knew I was supposed to be a movie star. So it's one of those destiny things. There's a great book that a teacher many years later, a spiritual teacher gave me, which was called The Soul's Code by James Hillman. And it really talked a lot about your destiny. And I, by the grace of God, had that. I had a long-standing relationship through my family. Since I was 3, I had it, but then my mother really reinforced reading the Bible and praying every day. And so I had a nonstop walking, talking relationship with a God of my understanding. And I think that helped me feel like I wasn't alone all the time, and that there was a moral code that I had to adhere to, because I was being watched all the time by someone who wasn't severely mentally ill per se. Right.
I let me tell you, I have the same exact thing. I took people say, where did I get my grit? Just like you, where did you get your grit? I always say, I got my grit from my Heavenly Father. And you can say whoever you want that person to be. But for me, as I was sleeping on the streets, and as I would look in the bathroom mirror of the bathroom I was able to go try to clean up, I would look in that mirror and I would always say, something's going to be better, because this is not the life my Heavenly Father expects me to be. And so, so I'm like you, I have a deep faith, and I do believe that helps us. I think it helps us with our healing when it comes to our trauma. Listen, we don't have a lot more time, and I really want to get into the school. I really want to talk about this school, because this was one of the things that attracted me to you. Not also the fact that you're just such an amazing human, but when I heard about this school, it was that light bulb aha moment for me, that I was just like, why are we not doing this? Why are what? I mean, this needs to be done. I mean, these kids, as I started this conversation with you, they come into the system because of choices other people made. And they come into the system with such trauma, whether it's physical or mental, the trauma, and we can heal. We can heal. Look at you, look at me. We can heal. So what are you doing, and how can we help you?
Well, thank you so much for that. Yes, I don't believe anyone comes into foster care without physical and without trauma. And then there's the trauma of going into foster care, which in and of itself is traumatic. And then there's the trauma of foster care. We know all about the pipelines. We know what I know for the most part, most of what I've seen at group homes in California, certainly when I was growing up, it's criminal neglect. There's the food, the nutrition, the lack of personal autonomy, the complete and abject lack of any tending to the soul of these children, personally, I find is abhorrent. I think it's unconscionable. And that we would even begin to look outside the foster care system in the US and the almost 500,000 kids that are there that are being daily criminally neglected, not to mention what we now know is that between the prison and the pedophile and the trafficking pipelines, we are rotten to the core.
Let me tell you something. The one thing Nelson Mandela said it. Nelson Mandela said, you judge your society based on how you treat your children.
Yeah.
Look at the way we treat our children.
And it's the biggest, I don't want to say that it's a lie, but there's a misinformation, I think, that these kids were horrifically abused, and then now they got saved and they got put into the foster care system, and Bob's your uncle, everything's okay.
Yep.
But here's what happened. I'll finally answer your question once and for all, because it's such a rare space, and I'm so honored that I get to even share my story, much less share my story in a way that will benefit others. So I'm honored to tell my story. So what happened was, I was doing really well. I was making tons of money. I was, hand over fisting it. I was the dream come true. I had created a life for myself that was beyond any expectation. And all of a sudden, I had a couple of really hard blows, as life does. And in those moments when I had those hard blows, I had absolutely no infrastructure. All of a sudden, the lack of family, the lack of community, the lack of history with people, all of that, when I needed them, there was, as you know, and as many people know, when things go terribly awry and you're from foster care, where do you go?
Where do you go?
Where do you go? Where is that home that you need to go to by the lake for a couple of days to recuperate after a devastating blow? There is nothing. And at a certain point, I was no longer able to tend to myself and to survive at the same time. Like, I couldn't take my little body with all the wounds and all the trauma and still show up at work.
Right.
At the same time, like, somebody needed to tend to that. And so what ended up happening was I imploded. I went back to where I felt safe, which is homeless again. I gave away everything. I had tons of money, a big house in Beverly Hills. I had a big car. I had everything that you would think that would have sufficed. I became homeless again because that's where my comfort was. And I just sort of lost it again. And then what ended up happening was I ended up being led on this very mysterious journey. This friend said, you should try this acupuncturist, and something just kept guiding me. I had a big dream at a certain point that I sensed something big was coming. And so I kind of was like, oh, I think I'll sober up. I think something's happening for me. I think something important is going to happen in my life. And it wasn't on the outside. It was something spiritual and deep. And so I just was led on from incredible healer to incredible teacher. During this time, I also started to write my story because I couldn't speak my story. People would ask me how I felt during that time, and I would start to throw up because the emotion, my body would not allow me to communicate any part of my story. It was too much for me to handle. So I just kept going and writing and writing and writing. I did a photo exhibit where I showed the images from other people's work, showing sort of like a narrative. I couldn't tell my story. It's only been in the last year, really, wow, since I started this school, and our friend Jocelyn Calsmith came on as a publicist, that I started to speak my story, because before that I could only write it. And so what happened was in 2020, I had through that time as well, I started to, through Children's Action Network, our beloved Jennifer Perry and Nicole Cadena, I started to be a volunteer in the foster care system for nonprofits that are helping and advocating for these youth. Through KidSave, I mentored a young boy for 9 years who was in foster care, who was in a lockdown psychiatric level 14 ward. They had basically thrown away the key. He was on 8 psychotropic drugs. And he had a snap from the just a little baby boy, 11 years old, just a tiny little skinny little guy with Coke bottle glasses. And he was on 8 psychotropic drugs. So I got to sort of be reminded and see anew all of the atrocities, group home after group home after group home, and plastic bags. How is that even? I love what you guys are doing with comfort cases. A child should not have to move from group home to group home with a plastic bag with an old pair of running shoes. This is just disgusting how we treat our children.
It's an industry that makes money on the backs of children, all of the money.
I gotta say, I did some research once, and between all of the people that have jobs through them, and the foster care to big pharma pipeline, and all of the other, just these vast systems that are in place because of these little kids, it's approximately about $1 trillion a year that are made off the backs of these 500,000 kids. approximately $1 trillion a year. So anyhow, I had this idea. Why was I in foster care? I have like a crazy story. Why was I in foster care for that year? And why did I see those things that I saw? And I just had a sense that I'm supposed to tell, and that all of this privilege that I've had, like being successful on TV and the platform that I have, is because I'm supposed to tell other people who wouldn't be exposed to it. Because even in LA, where you take young lawyers and judges to the prisons, you don't take them to the group homes. They don't show them the internment camps that are just riddled across this country. And so I'm supposed to tell, but I'm also taking my healing paradigm with all the healers that I have had, that I have worked with. They've all joined on instantly because they've been working with me, and they see how profound the need is, but they also see how easily transformed we are. Because like you said, we didn't do anything wrong. We haven't done anything wrong. This is our wound to heal. You and I both know how profound just the life force is inside of these children. Once you clear everything off of them, once you give them some good hot meals and some give them some vitamins and some minerals, and de-escalate them so that they're not constantly, and I mean 100% of the time, in fight, flight, or freeze, then what happens is you start to open up this seed, and there is a force in there that is just profound, that most normal children don't ever get the access to. Like you were saying, it's an untapped energetic force that we could change. If you want to change this world, start healing the youth aging out of foster care, start healing their trauma, and you will find the great leaders of tomorrow, because there's nothing that can stop them.
I agree. Angela, I say it all the time. You invest in a child, you actually invest in your future, because they are our future leaders. Listen, everyone, this conversation, it is not going to be the last one, by the way, because I know that Angela and I have a lot more to say, but this is what I really need you all to do. I need you to click on the link. I need you to go to visit the school that she's building, getting done. She needs the funds, by the way. The funds are there, $1 trillion. I know people are listening. I know people who have deep pockets. I know that we all can make a difference. And I'm telling you, sit with a child, just one child who's getting ready to age out of foster care, and talk to them. And you will understand why this school is needing. We need this school. We need to help our youth who are aging out, and we need to give them the net of hope, because when you give them hope, you give them dignity, and you also make the world a better place. Angela, thank you so much. I cannot wait for you to have you on our show, and I want you to know I love you. So take care, everybody. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for listening or watching the latest episode of Fostering Change. All of us on our team hope that you've learned something new today and have been inspired to be a good human. Now, just a reminder that you can always find Fostering Change on your favorite channels on Google, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and others, including, of course, comfortcases.org. I want to give a big thank you to all of you for joining us each and every week. And a reminder that if you have a suggestion for a guest, or maybe you might have a question about today's podcast, or are interested in becoming a sponsor of Fostering Change, please don't hesitate to email me personally at fosteringchange@comfortcases.org. Now, that's it for now. Thanks again, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Take care.